So I'm with Augustine
Njamnshi,
Njamnshi from the African Climate Justice
Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance.
And they just had a press conference about this. And if you could perhaps begin by explaining the sort of like the needs of Africa and why Africa. I mean, Africa is in a special position in relation to the world in terms of basically being largely undeveloped. So it is seeking adaptation finance rather than mitigation finance, which is more normally is what is being requested these days.
Correct. Africa is a continent with special needs and circumstances. This was recognized under Article 41E of the UNFCCC, right, in 1992.
Yeah.
And the African special needs and circumstances is not based on fairy tale. It is both scientific, cultural, and geopolitical. So Africa needs to be recognized like that under the Paris Agreement. The African continent is prioritizing adaptation because adaptation is what is an emergency on the continent. The consequences of climate change are already here with us. Although mitigation efforts have not been commensurate with the need, but adaptation has been that hammer that has been hanging over the heads of Africans over the years. So we must adapt, we must build our resilience, and hence adaptation needs are very concretely put on the table to make sure that Africa has the resources, the means of implementation of its adaptation commitments. If you look at the Sharm el-Sheikh plan of implementation, paragraph 34, it is very clear Africa is the only other continent that has been mentioned there. And it says that for climate action, both mitigation and adaptation in places, vulnerable places, especially Africa, is best when it is done through grants and not loans. These are some of the things that have been recognized in this space that must be put on the table for discussion. So where is the money going to come from? Article 9 of the Paris Agreement is very clear on this. That climate finance is that finance that comes from developed countries to developing countries for climate action. And it goes further to say that finance should be should be in line with the needs, plans, and priorities of developing countries. So Africa's plans and priorities are in the area of adaptation. That is why they are putting in this amount of money as a request to meet adaptation needs of the continent.
So at this mid-COP, there is an agenda item proposed, I think, by the Africa Group and supported by. Could you go? Sorry. And supported by the G77 in China, I understand, for an agenda item which is requesting something in the order of $5.8 trillion over the next 10 years for this adaptation finance, which is essentially a leapfrogging directly to renewable energy. Is that a way of understanding it?
Well, the renewable energy drive or the campaign in Africa, both from civil society and other stakeholders, is to build our resilience, is to support us in our adaptation. We cannot have adaptation without, we cannot have concrete adaptation and build our resilience without access to affordable, efficient, and accessible energy systems. And those affordability and efficiency can only come from decentralized, people-centered energy systems that can meet the needs of the people of the last mile. So if Africa is putting this on the table, it is so that it will build its resilience and do adaptation. Of course, mitigation, emission reductions will be co-benefits, but we should be seen as asking for resources to build our resilience and adaptation through access to efficient energy.
So you were saying before that there are huge numbers of Africans that do not have any electricity at all. and also who do not have any clean cooking, which causes health issues within houses because they're burning sort of wood and various things to.
Yes, more than 650 million Africans don't have access to any form of energy, whether clean energy or dirty energy. You know, we always say, sometimes asking Africans whether they are going in for renewable energy or sustainable energy or dirty energy is asking somebody that has been starving for over the years whether they want the kind of meal they want to have, whether it's vegetarian or carnivorous meal. That is a joke, because the person is hungry, all they need is food. But beyond that, we need to see that the food that they're having should be the one that is sustainable and that is good for the Mother Earth and for their own health, and that is renewable energy. So in Africa again, you see that lack of access to clean cooking is affecting over 800 million people. This is unheard of. There are many women that are suffering from lung diseases, in-house pollution related diseases that cannot be accounted for in these spaces. So at the end of the day, what Africa needs is such and clean energy that can meet their needs and drive their own economies. Economic development is a right. It's a right that is for every continent, every country on earth. The Western world, developed countries in particular, have developed from the Industrial Revolution from 1832 up to now, and they're still making use of dirty energy to build their economies. You have seen what happened with the war with Russia and Ukraine, how many countries in Europe in particular went back to open their coal mines. This shows that they are very concerned about their people and their economies, and they don't want anything to happen to them. But when they turn to Africa, they don't want to do commensurate action. Even the drive for renewable energy or gas or whatsoever in Africa is not for the use for African development. It's mostly for exportation into Europe and other countries to keep on building resilient economies while African economies and people are suffering. This is unfair, this is unjust, this is not equity.
Well, there are also pushes, even though there are various Western energy companies that are in fact extracting fossil fuels from Africa as we speak and exporting them, and that Africa should not exploit its own fossil fuel resources. So I mean, is the trade-off here that Africa does leave its fossil fuel resources in the ground in return for receiving sufficient funding and provision of technology and resources to build renewable energy?
That is what should happen, not as a favor, but as a right. If Africa has to keep its forests standing up to absorb the carbon, if Africa has to leave its own resources underground, let those who have benefited from the problem that we are suffering from today, which is the gross emissions that are now affecting our climate systems, let them pay for the alternative cost, for the opportunity cost, so that Africa will both develop and also help the world to mitigate or to absorb the carbon that is in the atmosphere. Without that, it is very, very difficult, though, to tell African governments and then turn around and do the same thing that you are asking them not to do. But from the civil society perspective, our concern is not just that. We ask ourselves a question. If a madman sets fire on your house, will you put off the fire, or will you run after the person and say, you must pay for my house that has been burnt? No, you have first of all have to put off the fire. So we are already seeing the consequences of climate change, and we know the cause of climate change is enormous greenhouse gas emissions that have been put in the atmosphere. So if we are suffering already this way, we should not be part of the problem again. We should be part of the solution. But let the Western world understand that Africa needs compensation, not only for what it's avoiding to do, which is committing the same errors, but also with its contribution. Because, as I said in the press conference, Africans are already doing enormous action as far as adaptation is concerned, because we have no choice. As we say in Africa, we either adapt or we adapt, because we have no choice.
So the next step in this is going to be a summit in Nairobi in Kenya, which is an African Union held summit. So what is your expectations or hopes from that summit?
Some people have baptized the summit Climate Action Summit. I hope it will be time for African leaders to sit down and even interrogate how we've performed with all of these negotiations. Because over the years, we've had colossal sums being announced in these conferences. At the end of the day, we don't know where the money is going to. So they should sit down and interrogate and make sure that they ask the right questions. And also to put the adaptation agenda on the table, that if there's one thing that we have to bring to COP28 and beyond, it should be the urgency and the pertinence of adaptation. We think the voice that is coming from Africa after this conference will be one voice. We've already started the mobilization. A few weeks ago, we had a session or a summit at the Pan-African Parliament, where more than 500 parliamentarians from all the 54 African countries were present, and we made some resolutions and some recommendations that have been taken back to the various parliaments. In the month of July, those parliamentarians will reconvene at the Pan-African Parliament in South Africa to again debate them and have a common position that will be presented in Nairobi come the African Climate Summit. We hope the outcome of Nairobi will take into consideration the concerns of the people that have been put through the parliamentarians, and that will be the position that will be taken to Dubai at COP28.
So China is supporting Africa in its efforts in relation to this. Are there any other nations that are supporting? Are there other nations that are supporting this objective?
Well, we hope the group of 77 and China should be standing behind this. We hope so. And we need to know whether they are supporting or not, but it is normal, it is moral for them to support such a position. You see, Africa is a continent, again, with special needs and circumstances. If you look at paragraph 34 of the Sharm el-Sheikh plan of implementation, it is stating there clearly that Africa needs more grants than loans for its climate action, especially adaptation. We hope others will rally around that decision to say, okay, we should pay more attention to Africa, because it is true, Africa is a continent with special needs and circumstances. Although over the years, since 2015 in Paris, we've seen this issue of special needs and circumstances that is brought by the African group of negotiators to be put on the agenda. It is always defeated before the agenda. So we hope by COP28, maybe something will happen that it will be put on the table. If we truly love Africa, if we truly are in support of Africa, support that agenda item to be put on the table in COP28 and be discussed.
First, you have to get it on the agenda here, though.
Exactly. So this is the kind of support we need for Africa.
Thank you.
You're welcome.